right. Thank you for everybody for being here. I'll be providing an update and a brief on what happened at JDC on December 25th when the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office was called to the Juvenile Detention Center at approximately 15:31 hours. Our deputies responded 10 minutes later in reference to major disturbance by the juveniles being housed there. Upon deputies' arrival, they were informed that 13 juveniles were in a pod, that employees were not able to gain access to them. There was possible riot conditions, but when we arrived at the scene, that was not the case. It was just a major disturbance. So our deputies were ordered to take over, and we called out our emergency response team and some of our tactical members since we were dealing with juveniles. Upon arrival, we slowed everything down. We had to make sure, since we're dealing with juveniles, what we had, but we were apprised that some juveniles, not only did they cover cameras, but they had possible scissors, broomsticks, and other weapons that could hurt not only our personnel, but personnel that worked at JDC. For everybody to know, it's very important that from this briefing that myself and the county manager and the county are working very closely together. It's very important and it's paramount that juveniles and also not only our personnel, but JDC personnel, that their safety is paramount, and that's what our goal is, and that's what we are working towards. During that time, we slowed everything down, and we were negotiating with the juveniles. There were some instigators there. We wanted to make sure that they also had the resources to make sure that we didn't have to use any type of force or any type of chemical munitions inside of a juvenile detention center. That was our last resort. What everyone needs to understand also is, as the sheriff, any type of detention center or JDC, I would love to keep our personnel out any way possible, but we had to make sure that we handled it correctly to make sure that we took things back under control at JDC, which did happen. The 13 that were there, 3 were 18 years and older. There was no control within the pod. That's why we took over. We took many into custody. A lot of the questions today will be what charges there are. We've slowed our detectives down to their credit during their investigation since Christmas Day. They have noticed that other things have gone on during that major disturbance. These juveniles range from charges from homicide and anything that is a violent crime or felonious in nature. We want to make sure that we know that they're not going anywhere and that they will be incarcerated at this time. But charges will be forthcoming. Exactly what charges we have, we do not know yet, since we are making sure we're doing a thorough investigation, just not for safety, but for charges and for it to go through the juvenile justice system. From that point, though, I will take any questions from you.
So, can you explain what a pod is for folks that aren't familiar, and how they were able to kind of isolate themselves within it?
What a pod is somewhere to where there's multiple individuals inside of a pod other than a separate place where they're locked up, but they can go into a communal area, and then they can also make sure that they're socializing with each other. That, I think, to answer the second part to your question, where things became out of control, I believe we really need to control, and to JDC's staff's credit, they attempted to, but reference just with staffing and other things that are happening with juveniles that I've been speaking about for a while now, is that things are quite dangerous. We can't take juveniles lightly. These juveniles that are in there for serious crimes, whether that's homicide or a violent crime. I'm going to go a little hard in the paint here. I understand that people want to be careful with juveniles. We do. But at the same time, they're there for a reason. And it's for something in there for serious crimes. And I'm telling and I'm warning people that if we keep going soft with juveniles, and they're the most dangerous in our county right now, we're going to pay the price. And I'll be very upfront. We're very lucky in this situation that our deputies who did a great job, and our spec ops units that did an awesome job with their ERT and SWAT and taking the facility back under control. But there was a lot of protocol. There was a lot of things that need to be changed. There's a lot of things that lawmakers need to look at as far as the juvenile code. And there are a lot of things that we're working together in conjunction with the county and the county manager and JDC staff and directors to make sure that this doesn't occur again.
Have you been able to identify any potential reason why this started in the first place?
We're still under investigation, but to come up to the front is they weren't happy with what was going on. It was Christmas Day. From what I'm getting right now, and I was briefed again this morning from our detectives, is kids are treated too lightly right now in this area. It shouldn't be the case at all. There needs to be more protocol that is safe for just not the juveniles that are being housed there, but also for JDC staff. So protocol needs to tighten up over there, and that's something I'm working with the county manager. Juveniles took advantage of it. They're empowered. They'll do anything possible to either, I wouldn't say try to escape, but take advantage of the situation and the staff there, and that's not acceptable as the sheriff of Bernalillo County, and that's something that I'm very serious about and helping correct.
Does de-escalation in a situation like this in JDC look different than in MDC, for example? I know you said using any sort of force was very last option, but does protocol on your end look different in JDC versus MDC?
You know, it does to a point with juveniles. I discussed earlier with chemical munitions. That's something that we need to think about when you're using any type of OC spray or CS items that we use doing tactical engagement that you see on a regular here for SWAT calls around Bernalillo County. We have to take that into consideration. They are juveniles. I would like not to go hands-on with juveniles as quickly as at all, actually. So the de-escalation question that you're asking is, they're in a pod. They're locked down. They're not controlled, but they're contained in one area. There's no reason not to negotiate with them, and that's another element that we brought with our ERT and our SWAT team, is ensuring that there were negotiators there to find out not only who the instigators were, what their needs were, what was going on, making sure that there's no one held hostage, whether that is another resident or an inmate there, whether that's staff, making sure that we're finding out and we're talking and speaking with them to make sure other information that we have so we don't have to use force if not necessary. Do you also have the status of the population at JDC? You know, I don't have the exact numbers. You'd have to get that from them. They do a lot with all over the state, specifically Bernalillo and Sandoval County. If the numbers are correct, 56 to 59 in certain areas, but the numbers you'd have to get from JDC. I don't want to misspeak.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. The first, can you kind of just describe and define the disturbance and riot language? What would make the difference to actually have made this a riot situation?
You know, a riot situation you can compare to, and I worked it when I was working in state police, is Santa Rosa, to where a guard was killed. Inmates had control over control rooms, had control over personnel, had control over staff, had control over just not one pod, but starting to take advantage of the whole system itself. As far as a major disturbance, we know something happened. We didn't see that there were any hostages. At the time, they were stating there might be hostages, but that was people and other residents that were inside that pod. They didn't have any other weapons that we knew other than what I told you, a broomstick, scissors, and metal, as compared to what I saw in Santa Rosa, to where they had weapons and chemical munitions and other weapons to utilize against personnel.
The second thing, you mentioned the negotiations. What were some of the things that they were negotiating while they were in that pod and deputies were trying to regain control of JDC?
Asking for food for certain items, and I'll be very upfront. They were negotiating to take advantage of what was going on and what they had control over. So when you're asking for 15 to 20 chicken wings, acting like this is a movie, laughing about it, not being serious with our negotiators, saying they have hostages, that's what we take very seriously, but also understanding that they were taking advantage of the situation and we weren't going to allow that to happen.
How many guards were on duty in the facility that day?
I'll leave that up to JDC, and that's still the investigation that comes at a later time. I don't want to speak on their staffing. I'll let them speak for it. But I will tell you, I would like to have seen more people there, and I wouldn't even call them guards. Again, I'm going to go hard on the paint once again. We're at a juvenile detention center where people have been accused of murder and have been accused of serious violent crimes. I don't know why there aren't guards in there, and I do not know why there's personnel in there that aren't capable and don't have the personnel or the equipment to handle such a situation. I'm warning you, we better stop this. This is why it's out of control here in Bernalillo County. We are now empowering kids that are still there right now as we speak, letting them know what they can do and that we're not handling it correctly. I'm tired of people going soft in the paint on it. It's beyond irritating, and now not only did I have to involve my personnel, we have personnel from JDC, and we also have other inmates that are at that JDC that could have been harmed. We need to stop going soft in the paint on serious violent offenders that are juveniles. Go ahead.
What safety mechanisms were or have been put in place to prevent another disturbance?
Immediately for me as the sheriff, we're doing that. We're working on protocol now. Mechanisms that have been put in place is we're helping give advice on the protocol. There is a juvenile code and certain things that you cannot do within a juvenile facility, such as using any type of metal to handcuff, what type of restraint you use, whether or not you can use chemical munitions. Those are the protocols that we're looking at and that I have to go to lawmakers for. As far as what the sheriff's office is doing to provide that advice is making sure the appropriate staffing and making sure that their training program and protocol is followed to the T. And actually, we know mistakes were made. We're all human, but those are mistakes we can't have again. We need to correct those immediately, so that's what we're doing. Hopefully that answers your question.
Sure, do you have I know you mentioned in your briefing that many were arrested. Do you have an exact number on how many?
So they were detained at the time, and I won't say arrested because we have not filed new charges. They're already there on current charges, so there's a total of 13. Charges will be forthcoming. I was just, again, briefed this morning by our lead detective. We're finding a lot other info out in the protocol and in the JDC that I don't like and that I'm very concerned about, and that's something that I'm working closely with the county manager, but charges are forthcoming.
How many of those were for first-degree murder, if any?
You know, I don't have those numbers out. I'd have to look at a paper, but it was a decent percentage. Good.
When do you think the violent juveniles of this community will have a reality check?
When adults and lawmakers and law enforcement has a reality check and actually starts holding juveniles accountable.
Was JDC a concern of yours before this happened?
You know, it's been a concern of mine ever since I was a detective. We've seen it for decades, and you see law enforcement standing behind the cameras. We've dealt with it. A detective just briefed me this morning. I saw a morning report that I'm concerned. To answer your question, yes, I have been concerned. I'm more concerned. The other day, I believe we had a handful of juveniles that are arrested in a stolen motor vehicle. I've told you how important that is to me to dampen the crime here in Bernalillo County, and JDC rejected them. Again, I'm going to go hard in the paint. We need to stop this nonsense. We have people that are, I told you, violent crime, stolen vehicles is a bridge to more violent crime. What do we have at JDC? And now I have my deputies working their tail off and detaining a bunch of juveniles to take them into JDC, and they're turned away because the crime was not violent enough. That is ridiculous to me, and it's one of the dumbest things that I've seen in a long time.
There were 3 people that were treated for minor injuries that day. Can you comment on how they're doing?
They're all fine. We're making sure as the investigation goes what their treatment is. Nothing serious of nature, but they're, you know, any type of situation like this, you're going to have bumps, bruises, cuts, scrapes, things like that, but nothing serious that was reported to me that I'm concerned about.
And just to clarify, you mentioned you didn't want to escalate it to certain levels, but was there physicality that was needed to get the situation?
No, not at all. Like I said, other than our negotiators, I'm very proud of our emergency response team and our SWAT operators, how they handled the situation. From our new technology, I was able to live stream and watch it live myself. And they did an excellent job not only speaking and negotiating with the juveniles, but really no use of force at all. And not saying that that can't happen, but what they did to not only contain themselves and use their training and everything that they've learned is credit to them.
And one last clarification, were these largely males that started this? Was it female? Was it co-ed? How did it go?
Largely male, yes.
Sheriff, as far as video of this situation, is this something that we can IPRA? Is this something that you would be willing, any sort of response video that you would be willing to share with us?
Absolutely. We had a briefing this morning, so I was talking to our PIO earlier. We'll see if we have to redact anything, but we'll get you that video so you can see it and you can nip or anything you want, as you know, of course. But we'll get it to you, so all of that's coming in. I'm just slowed things down a little bit since I'm giving our detectives a little time because we are investigating a lot of other things that occurred during this major disturbance, and I want to make sure that I get that information back to the county manager and JDC directors and personnel to make sure that the protocol is addressed for safety right away.
Sheriff, one other thing. You mentioned that some of these juveniles covered cameras around the area. How much more difficult does it make your detectives' jobs to determine kind of who was the leader and the instigator and like kind of what happened before your deputies got there with their body cam? And obviously we have that footage, but how much more difficult does that make it?
It makes it difficult, and you know that comes through interviews and looking at different evidence that you have at the scene. But what I would tell you is it makes it more difficult in the totality of the circumstance of everything that I talked about. Is everybody tries to go too soft in the paint with juveniles? They're in there for a reason. They know what they're doing. They know what evidence they're hiding. They know what they're going to do during this time. Again, Why are we tiptoeing around on that they're juveniles and we have to treat them so lightly? It's nonsense. And that makes it very difficult, not only for detectives here at this scene, for APD, for state police, and that's just not here, that's all around the state. And we continue to see this time and time again, and myself and DA Bregman have told you that juveniles are the main driving force of our crime and gun violence here in Bernalillo County. I saw a comment on somewhere that one of you published, not to discredit any of you, but something that, why are we going to incarcerate a juvenile that made a foolish mistake bringing a firearm into a high school? Are you kidding me right now? We have someone bringing a firearm, and we're there giving preventive messages from myself, from the DA, from PIOs, from community engagement, all of law enforcement. But hey, you brought a gun to a school, but it's okay because you just made a mistake. Imagine the parent on the other end of a victim or worrying about their parent's safety. I have a niece and nephew right now that's an APS. That is a ridiculous statement to me, and again, I'm going to be hard in the paint again. Nonsense comments. Nonsense.
Sheriff, one last follow-up for me, to the story that you told about your deputies bringing in juveniles they found with the stolen vehicle and being turned away. Who's making those decisions, whether they accept juveniles or not?
JDC and also Children's Law. So I have all these paper in front of me. Again, you can see I'm quite irritated, but at the same time, it's my job as an elected official to communicate, and we come up on a great time of a 30-day session that's budgetary. And I called for a special session, and I will not back down on that when we had the issue before with gun violence. We have to address this. 3 of these forms that I have in front of me, I've already, again, talked to the county manager, but directors at JDC, and some of the things that they're even asking for is reinforcement for windows and doors in the facility, remodel of intake and medical area, and the reason I bring those up is we house a lot of violent offenders from all over the state, specifically from Valencia, Sandoval, and Bernalillo County. When you have restraint devices that can't be utilized correctly for how you restrain a juvenile, the right protocol, the right training, you're not only you're gonna have personnel that gets hurt. That's when we start seeing an escalation of force. Why are we not preventing that? And why are we not starting to update these antiquated laws that I've been talking about since I've been in office and I've seen for going on 26 years? When it comes to juveniles specifically that we're talking about, but everything is antiquated and everyone's afraid to talk about it. That's my job, and we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to corner people, and we're going to have hard conversations. They are forgetting that while we're sitting in our nice warm office overlooking the city, that there's people right now, not only my deputies, but MDC personnel, JDC staff, New Mexico State prisons that are dealing with on the ground every day, and there's protocols and not laws, but protocols and rules that are working against them to do their job safely, thus not keeping the inmates themselves safe. What are we doing?
Sure, can you touch on the concern of 18-year-olds being in a juvenile facility as well? Because I know you mentioned that there were 3 18-year-olds involved in that. Maybe some of your concerns as to how that's happening.
The question I had right away was, why are 18-year-olds with 14-year-olds? We also know who's going to be influenced, and it's going to be the 18-year-old that's going to be the bully, that's going to be the instigator, that's going to influence. And one of the solutions that we looked, again, is cost of care agreements with other juvenile detention centers within the state of New Mexico that would temporarily house Bernalillo County, Sandoval County youth, which would thus help separate the 18 and the 14-year-olds. We know that juveniles need socialization. I'm aware of that. But we also know that 18-year-old people right now that have committed a murder know what they're doing. They didn't do it by mistake. They're waiting for the adjudication process. They're influencing 13 and 14-year-olds. Now we are educating 13 and 14-year-olds. Everyone wants to talk about education. Well, guess what? When you mix ages like that, you're giving them a bad education on what not to do, how to hide your crime, and how to do a higher crime. Bottom line.
Just follow up to that. What were the age ranges of, I guess, everybody involved, I guess, the juveniles involved?
So I'm still coming anywhere from 13 to 18 years of age.
And I'd just like to ask one more time, for community members that heard about this happening and are now concerned, A, how did this happen? Could it happen again? You know, am I in danger of kids getting out of this facility? What message would you give to them?
The message is that's why we're here now. The danger of kids getting out of this facility, no. I think the danger are kids getting out of this facility. Are they really rehabilitated? I'd tell you no. What are they going to do again? What about the juveniles that are being rejected from deputies and officers with just not in Bernalillo County but state of New Mexico? We're empowering them ourselves, people. I don't know what else to tell you anymore. As far as the facility itself, no, it's safe, and that's what we're looking at protocol. We have detectives over there as we speak. I'll always give advice, and I said we work very closely with the county and directors to make sure that we're working in concert in how we respond.
Sheriff, I'd heard the only injuries that were involved were the kids had inhaled some fire extinguisher dust from self-initiated trying to put out cameras and such. Can you speak to that? You know, if that's
I can speak to that. That is true on things we've seen, but what I stated earlier is we're investigating other crimes that have occurred. So while that investigation is going on, I won't comment on that as far as making sure that we keep the validity and the progress of the investigation going in a positive direction. But we'll probably see other injuries, other items, other issues, other concerns come from that investigation. And that's why we have detectives, to their credit, that slowed it down themselves. They didn't want to arrest everybody that night because honestly, with covered cameras, to your point, what evidence do they have? What corroborating statements do they have? What witness statements do they have? They want to make sure that they do a thorough investigation, just not for an arrest, but again, as I stated, to make sure that everybody's safe. And to your question, can they get out? Is the community safe? We want to make sure that we're answering all those questions, and then we actually have a solution to each one of those questions. Anybody else? Good? All right, thank you.